I woke up that Tuesday morning to the sound of construction equipment rumbling across my property, which immediately told me this day was going to be hell. My name is Nathan Kellerman, and I own a 20-acre property in rural Colorado just outside Boulder. I bought this land 5 years ago specifically because it was peaceful, private, and most importantly, had a beautiful natural meadow where wildflowers bloomed every spring. The property came with a small rustic cabin that I renovated into my permanent home after leaving the corporate world behind. What I did not account for when I purchased this slice of heaven was that the area would eventually become part of a newly formed homeowners association. The HOA formation happened about 2 years after I moved in. A developer bought up several surrounding parcels and built a neighborhood of cookie-cutter houses. Before I knew it, there were enough properties in the vicinity that someone decided we needed an HOA. I fought it tooth and nail, but the county approved the incorporation of the HOA boundaries, which somehow included my property despite being here first. The legal battle to exempt myself cost me $15,000 and got me nowhere. According to the county, my land fell within the geographical boundaries, and that was that. The HOA president was a woman named Brenda Hutchison, a 52-year-old real estate agent who moved to Colorado from California and apparently brought all her meddling tendencies with her. She had that particular haircut, you know, the one where the back is shorter than the front, and she always wore athleisure wear despite never actually exercising. Her voice had this sharp quality that could cut through glass, and she wielded the HOA rules like a weapon against anyone who dared to live differently than her vision of suburban perfection. I tried my best to ignore the HOA. I paid my dues under protest, ignored their ridiculous notices about my non-conforming cabin aesthetic, and basically kept to myself. My property was large enough that I barely interacted with the neighborhood folks. I worked remotely as a software consultant, so I spent most of my time on my land, enjoying the solitude. That morning, though, the solitude was shattered. I threw on jeans and a flannel shirt and headed outside. The November air was crisp, promising snow within the month. What I saw made my blood pressure spike instantly. There were 2 trucks, a small excavator, and 4 workers actively clearing a section of my meadow. They had already flattened about a 1/4 acre and were in the process of pouring a concrete foundation. I marched over there, my boots crunching through the frost-covered grass. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" I shouted over the noise of the machinery. One of the workers, a younger guy with a bright orange safety vest, looked up at me with confusion. "We're building the community warming station, sir. This is the location specified in the work order." "This is my property," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Private property. Who authorized this?" The worker pulled out a clipboard and flipped through some papers. "Says here this was approved by the HOA board and the property owner gave consent for community use of this space." "I'm the property owner and I absolutely did not give consent." The worker's face fell. He turned and called out, "Hey, Marcus, we got a problem." An older man, presumably the foreman, walked over. He was in his 50s with a weathered face and tired eyes. "What's up?" I explained the situation again. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. From what I could hear, he was talking to someone from the HOA. After a few minutes of back and forth, he handed me the phone. "Mr. Kellerman." It was Brenda's voice, syrupy sweet but with an edge underneath. "There seems to be some confusion this morning." "There's no confusion, Brenda. You're building something on my land without my permission. That's called trespassing and possibly a dozen other legal violations." Now, Nathan, if you had attended the last 3 HOA meetings, you would know that we voted on the warming station location. The community needs a place where residents can gather during winter emergencies when power goes out. Your Meadow was the most central location. I don't care what you voted on. You can't vote to use private property that isn't yours. This is my land, and I'm telling these workers to stop immediately. Actually, Brenda's voice took on that lecturing tone I had come to hate. If you review Section 47 of the HOA bylaws, the board has the authority to designate common use areas for community welfare purposes. This warming station serves the greater good. Section 47 applies to common areas, not private property. This is my deed, my land, my meadow. Stop the construction now or I'm calling the police. There was a pause. Nathan, let's not be hasty. Why don't you come down to the HOA office this afternoon and we can discuss this civilly? Tell your workers to stop. Now. The construction is going forward. The contracts are signed, the permits are approved. If you have an issue, you can file a formal complaint with the board and we'll address it at next month's meeting. I hung up on her and handed the phone back to Marcus. Look, buddy, Marcus said, his voice weary. I'm just a contractor trying to do my job. I got permits, I got a contract, I got paid half up front. If there's a property dispute, you folks need to work it out, but I've got a schedule to keep. If you continue working, you're trespassing. I'm asking you nicely to stop until this gets resolved. Marcus looked at his crew, then back at me. I'm going to call my boss in the HOA office. Give me an hour to sort this out. We'll pause work until then. It wasn't ideal, but at least the machinery stopped. I went back to my cabin and immediately called my lawyer, a guy named Richard Paulson who had helped me with the property purchase and the previous HOA battle. Unfortunately, I got his voicemail. I left an urgent message and then called the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. A deputy arrived about 45 minutes later. Deputy Anderson was a no-nonsense woman in her 30s who listened to my explanation while surveying the construction site. "You have your property deed?" she asked. I ran back to the cabin and grabbed all my documentation. Deputy Anderson reviewed everything carefully. "This is definitely your property according to these boundaries," she confirmed. "Do they have any paperwork showing they have permission to build here?" The foreman, Marcus, produced the permits and the HOA authorization. Deputy Anderson examined those as well. "Okay, here's the situation," she explained. "The county issued building permits based on the HOA's representation that they had authority to build here. But if this is your private property and you didn't consent, then there's a civil issue and possibly criminal trespass. I can't force them to stop working based on a civil dispute, but I can document everything and advise them that they're proceeding at their own risk. So they can just keep building on my land. You need to get a court order, Mr. Kellerman. File for an emergency injunction. That's the fastest way to legally stop this. In the meantime, I'll file a report documenting the dispute. If they continue after you've explicitly told them to stop, that strengthens your case for criminal trespass, but I still can't physically stop them without a court order." It was frustrating, but I understood. Deputy Anderson spoke with Marcus and his crew, explaining the situation. She made it clear in her report that I had refused permission and that they were proceeding at their own legal risk. Marcus made another call to his boss and to Brenda. After that conversation, he made the decision to pause the work pending legal clarification. "I don't need the liability," he told me. "We'll wait to hear from the lawyers before we continue, but I'm billing the HOA for the delay, just so you know." "That's between you and them," I said. After everyone cleared out, I spent the rest of the day trying to reach Richard. He finally called me back around 6 in the evening. "Nathan, I got your messages. This is outrageous," Richard said. He had a calm, measured voice that I found reassuring. "Send me all the documentation you have. I'll draft an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order and injunction. We can probably get a hearing within a few days. What are my chances? If this is genuinely your private property and you didn't consent, the law is entirely on your side. The HOA can't just appropriate private land for their purposes, regardless of what their bylaws say. Their bylaws don't supersede property law. This is pretty clear-cut, actually. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Thanks, Richard. I'll send everything tonight. Over the next 3 days, Richard worked his magic. He filed the emergency motion, and we got a hearing scheduled for Friday morning. In the meantime, the construction site sat quiet, the partially poured foundation a concrete scar on my beautiful meadow. On Thursday, I received a certified letter from the HOA. It was a formal notice stating that I was in violation of HOA bylaws for interfering with approved community improvement projects, and that I would be fined $500 per day until I allowed the construction to continue. The letter was signed by Brenda and 2 other board members. I scanned it and sent it to Richard immediately. He called me back within the hour. This is harassment and possibly extortion. They're trying to bully you into submission. Don't pay anything. This actually helps our case because it shows bad faith on their part. The Friday hearing was held at the Boulder County Courthouse. I arrived with Richard at 8:30 in the morning. Brenda showed up with the HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Todd Mercer who wore an expensive suit and had the kind of smile that screamed used car salesman. The judge was a woman named Judge Patricia Kowalski, who had a reputation for being fair but tough. She reviewed the filings from both sides before the hearing even started. "All right, let's make this quick," Judge Kowalski said once we were all seated. "Mr. Paulson, you're seeking a temporary restraining order to stop construction on your client's property. Lay out your case." Richard stood and presented the facts clearly and concisely. He showed my property deed, the survey maps, and the timeline of events. He emphasized that I had never given consent and that the HOA had no legal right to appropriate private property for community use. Todd Mercer stood up when it was his turn. "Your Honor, the HOA has broad authority under its bylaws to designate areas for community welfare. Mr. Kellerman is a member of the HOA and therefore subject to its rules. The warming station serves a vital public safety function, and the board followed all proper procedures in approving and permitting this project." Judge Kowalski looked up from the documents. "Mr. Mercer, does the HOA own this property or have an easement on it?" "No, Your Honor, but the bylaws allow for community use designations when necessary for resident welfare." "Mr. Mercer, I don't care what the bylaws say. Private property rights are constitutionally protected. You can't vote to take someone's land just because you think it serves the community. That's not how property law works." Judge Kowalski's tone made it clear she was not impressed. "Unless you have some legal instrument showing ownership, an easement, or explicit consent from Mr. Kellerman, your client is trespassing." Todd tried to argue about the HOA's authority and the community benefit, but Judge Kowalski cut him off. "Enough. The temporary restraining order is granted. All construction on Mr. Kellerman's property must cease immediately. We'll schedule a full hearing for the preliminary injunction in 2 weeks, but I'm telling you right now, Mr. Mercer, unless you have something substantial to present, your client is going to lose this case and possibly face significant damages." I could see Brenda's face turning red from across the courtroom. As we filed out, she marched up to me. "You're destroying the community, Nathan. People could die in a winter emergency because of your selfishness. Then build the warming station on HOA common property or on your own property, Brenda. You don't get to steal mine." "This isn't over," she hissed. Actually, Richard interjected smoothly, it pretty much is. And you might want to talk to your insurance company about the liability you've created for the HOA by authorizing trespassing and property damage. We left them standing there. I felt vindicated but also exhausted. I just wanted to be left alone on my property. And instead, I was being dragged into legal battles and neighborhood drama. The weekend was quiet. I spent Saturday trying to repair some of the damage to my meadow where the equipment had torn up the grass and wildflower roots. It was depressing seeing the concrete foundation sitting there like a tombstone. I would need to have it removed, which would cost money and create more damage. On Monday morning, I woke up to find the construction crew back at work. I could not believe it. After the court order, after everything, they were actively building again. I called Richard immediately while watching from my window as workers erected the frame for what looked like a large shed or small building. "They're violating the restraining order," Richard said, his calm voice now edged with anger. "Call the sheriff immediately. This is contempt of court." I called the sheriff's office and explained the situation. Deputy Anderson herself responded within 20 minutes, along with another deputy. She reviewed the court order I showed her and then walked over to the construction site. I followed her over there. "Who's in charge here?" Deputy Anderson called out. Marcus, the foreman, emerged from behind the framing. He looked uncomfortable. "That would be me." "Are you aware there's a court order stopping all construction on this property?" I was told by the HOA that the issue was resolved and we were cleared to continue. Deputy Anderson's expression hardened. "Well, you were told wrong. This is an active restraining order issued by Judge Kowalski on Friday. Construction must cease immediately. I need to call my boss. You can call whoever you want, but the machinery stops now. If you continue, you'll be arrested for contempt of court." That got everyone's attention. The workers started packing up their tools. Marcus got on the phone, and from his body language, he was having a heated conversation. After the crew left, Deputy Anderson turned to me. "You should have your lawyer file a contempt motion against the HOA. This is a blatant violation of the court order." Richard filed the contempt motion that afternoon. He also expanded our lawsuit to include claims for damages, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The court scheduled an emergency hearing for Wednesday. Tuesday afternoon, I got a visit from 3 HOA board members. Brenda was there, along with a man named Keith Sanderson, who was the vice president, and a woman named Linda Patterson, who was the treasurer. They showed up at my door unannounced. "Nathan, we need to talk," Brenda said, her voice strained. "Through our lawyers, Brenda. You're named in a lawsuit and there's an active restraining order." "Please," Linda said. She seemed genuinely distressed, unlike Brenda, who just looked angry. "We're trying to fix this situation. The board met last night, and we want to propose a compromise." Against my better judgment, I let them in but immediately called Richard and put him on speakerphone so he could hear everything. "What's this compromise?" I asked once we were all in my living room. Keith, a thin man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses, spoke up. "We recognize that we may have overstepped regarding your property. We'd like to purchase a 1-acre parcel from you, specifically the section where the foundation is already poured. We'll pay fair market value plus 20% for the inconvenience." "And if I say no?" "Nathan, be reasonable," Brenda interjected. "We've already invested $30,000 in this project. The permits are approved, the foundation is in place. You'd be helping the entire community by selling us this small section. You invested that money by trespassing on my property. That's your problem, not mine." Linda tried a softer approach. "We really do need a warming station. Last winter, we had a 3-day power outage during that blizzard." People were in danger. This facility could save lives. Then build it on land you actually own or have rights to, Richard's voice came through the phone speaker. My client is not interested in selling any portion of his property. And frankly, after your client violated a court order yesterday, we're now seeking significant damages in addition to the injunction. We didn't violate anything, Brenda protested. There was a miscommunication with the contractor. A miscommunication. Richard's voice was sharp now. Mrs. Hutchison, we have documentation that you personally called the contractor Monday morning and told them the issue was resolved and to resume work. That's not a miscommunication. That's contempt of court. Brenda's face went pale. Keith and Linda both turned to look at her. Is that true, Brenda? Linda asked. I was told by Todd that we could continue, Brenda said defensively. Did Todd tell you the court order was lifted? Richard asked. Silence. I think you should leave, I said. If the HOA wants to make any offers or proposals, do it through proper legal channels. And stop trespassing on my property. Stop sending me threatening letters and stop violating court orders. They left, though Brenda shot me a look that could kill. Linda seemed worried, and Keith looked like he was already calculating the HOA's liability. The Wednesday hearing was intense. Judge Kowalski was not happy. Mr. Mercer, explain to me how construction resumed on Monday morning, less than 3 days after I issued a restraining order. Todd Mercer stood and tried to pin it on the contractor's misunderstanding, but Richard had come prepared. He presented phone records showing Brenda had called the contractor Monday morning, and he had a signed affidavit from Marcus stating that Brenda explicitly told him the issue was resolved and to resume work. Judge Kowalski's expression grew darker as she reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Hutchison, stand up, the judge ordered. Brenda stood, looking defiant but nervous. Did you authorize the contractor to resume work on Monday? I believed we had the right to continue, Your Honor. I was acting in the best interest of the community. That's not what I asked. Did you tell the contractor to resume work after I issued a restraining order? Yes, but you thought you could ignore a court order. Mrs. Hutchison, I find you in contempt of court. I'm imposing a fine of $5,000 payable immediately. If construction resumes without proper authorization, you will face jail time. Do you understand? Brenda nodded, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Judge Kowalski turned to Todd Mercer. Mr. Mercer, I'm granting the preliminary injunction. All construction must stop. Furthermore, the HOA will be responsible for removing all materials and structures from Mr. Kellerman's property and restoring it to its original condition. I'm also awarding Mr. Kellerman compensatory damages for his legal fees and for the damage to his property. We'll determine the exact amount after restoration is complete. Your Honor, Todd began, but the judge held up her hand. I'm not finished. I'm also going to require the HOA to send written notice to all residents explaining what happened here, because I suspect many residents don't know their board authorized illegal trespassing and property damage. Transparency might prevent this kind of overreach in the future. It was a complete victory, but I could see Brenda and the board members looked furious rather than chastened. Over the next 2 weeks, a different contractor came and removed the foundation and all construction materials. They reseeded the torn-up sections of the meadow, though it would take until spring to know if the wildflowers would recover. The HOA sent me a check for $15,000 to cover my legal fees and damages, though Richard said we could probably have gotten more if we pushed. I thought it was over. I was wrong. 3 weeks after the court ruling, I received notice that the HOA was holding a special meeting to vote on a special assessment against all properties, to cover the costs of the failed warming station project. The assessment was $50,000 per property owner. When I saw that, I knew exactly what they were doing. Since there were only 20 properties in the HOA, this would generate $1 million. The project had cost them maybe $50,000 total. This was retaliation, pure and simple. They were going to financially punish every homeowner, and they'd make sure everyone knew it was because of me. I called Richard. Can they do this? Technically, yes, if they follow proper procedures for a special assessment. But this seems excessive and punitive. You might have grounds to challenge it, and other homeowners certainly could. The special meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening at the community center, one of the few actual HOA common buildings. I decided to attend, even though I expected to be vilified. The community center was packed. I recognized some of my neighbors, though I had barely spoken to most of them. The room buzzed with angry conversation. As soon as I walked in, I felt hostile eyes turn toward me. Brenda called the meeting to order. She wore a navy blue blazer and had her hair freshly styled. She looked like she was about to enjoy this. Thank you all for coming. As you know, we're here to vote on a special assessment to cover costs incurred by the failed warming station project. Why do we need a special assessment? Called out a man I recognized as living 2 properties over from me. His name was Tom something. Because one property owner decided his personal preferences were more important than community safety, Brenda said, looking directly at me. The HOA invested significant resources into the warming station, which would have provided emergency shelter during winter storms. We contracted with builders, obtained permits, and began construction. Unfortunately, Nathan Kellerman filed a lawsuit that halted the project, and the court ruled against the HOA. We've incurred legal fees, construction costs, and restoration costs totaling approximately $200,000. Rather than deplete the HOA's emergency reserves, the board recommends this special assessment. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Several people turned to glare at me. I stood up. May I address the meeting? This is not a public forum, Brenda said coldly. This is a vote on the assessment. Actually, called out a woman near the back, HOA rules say any member can speak at special meetings. I checked before I came. Brenda looked annoyed but nodded curtly. 2 minutes. I walked to the front of the room. First, let me clarify what actually happened. The HOA board, without my permission or even notifying me, began building on my private property, not common property. My land, which I own and pay taxes on. When I discovered this, I asked them to stop. They refused. I got a court order which they violated. The reason you're facing this assessment isn't because I wanted to stop a community project. It's because your HOA board broke the law. You could have just let us build it, Brenda interrupted. It was for the community. Would you let someone build on your yard without asking? The court agreed this was illegal. If the board had come to me first, if they had asked permission or offered to buy the land, we could have discussed it. Instead, they trespassed, and when they got caught, they kept trespassing. Tom stood up. Why didn't you just work something out? Now we're all paying for your stubbornness. I'm paying the same assessment you are, I pointed out. And I didn't create this situation. The board did. They gambled with HOA funds on an illegal project. Ask yourself why they didn't build the warming station on actual HOA common land. There are 3 parcels of common land in this development. Why didn't they use those? Brenda jumped in. Those parcels aren't centrally located. One of them is more central than my property, I countered, and you could have built it in the parking lot of this community center. There's plenty of space. I think they chose my property specifically because I've been vocal about disagreeing with HOA overreach, and this was a power play. The room had gotten quieter. People were listening now. Linda, the HOA treasurer, stood up. She looked uncomfortable. "I need to disclose something to the members. I voted against the warming station location from the beginning. I told the board we needed Mr. Kellerman's explicit written permission before proceeding. I was outvoted. I also need to say that our actual costs for this project are approximately $75,000, not $200,000. The special assessment, as proposed, is excessive." Brenda's face turned red. "Linda, that's not appropriate. I'm the treasurer, and I have a fiduciary duty to be honest with the members," Linda interrupted. "The board is proposing we collect $1 million to cover $75,000 in costs. That's not responsible financial management." The room erupted in arguments. People were angry, but now the anger was directed at the board instead of at me. Several homeowners started demanding a detailed accounting of the costs. Others questioned why the board had proceeded without proper legal verification of property rights. After an hour of heated debate, someone moved to table the special assessment vote until the board provided a full financial accounting and explored other funding options. The motion passed overwhelmingly. Brenda looked like she wanted to scream. As people filed out, several neighbors came up to me. Most were apologetic. A few thanked me for standing up to the board. Tom, who had been hostile earlier, shook his head. "I had no idea they built on your actual property without permission. The notice we got made it sound like you were just being difficult about a community building location." "That's because the board controlled the narrative," I said. "They never sent out the notice the judge ordered explaining what really happened." Tom's eyes narrowed. "Are you serious?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the court order requiring the HOA to notify all residents of the facts of the case. Tom took a picture of it with his phone. "I'm sending this to everyone I know in the neighborhood. The board needs to go." Over the next few weeks, there was a revolt within the HOA. Homeowners started attending board meetings and demanding transparency. Linda resigned from the board in protest of Brenda's leadership and released a detailed financial report showing that the board had misrepresented the costs. The actual expenses were $72,000, and the HOA's insurance was covering $40,000 of that. A group of homeowners, led by Tom and another neighbor named Sarah Rodriguez, started a petition to recall Brenda and Keith from the board. They needed signatures from 51% of homeowners, and they got it within 10 days. The recall election was held on a Saturday in early February. I attended and voted, though I kept a low profile. The vote wasn't even close. Brenda and Keith were removed from the board with over 75% voting for recall. Brenda showed up to the meeting and made a scene, yelling about ungrateful neighbors and how she had dedicated years to the community. Security, a sheriff's deputy hired for the meeting because of expected tensions, finally escorted her out when she refused to leave after the vote was concluded. Linda was elected as the new HOA president, with Tom as vice president and Sarah as secretary. Their first action was to formally apologize to me on behalf of the HOA and to propose an amendment to the bylaws limiting board authority and requiring homeowner approval for any expenditure over $5,000. I thought that would be the end of it. I was ready to return to my quiet life, maybe even participate a little more in the community now that the leadership had changed. But in early March, I got a call from Deputy Anderson. "Mr. Kellerman, we need to talk to you about the former HOA president, Brenda Hutchison." "What about her?" "Can you come down to the station?" I drove to the Boulder County Sheriff's Office wondering what this could be about. Deputy Anderson met me and led me to a small conference room where a detective was waiting. His name was Detective Frank Morrison, a heavyset man in his 40s with tired eyes. "Mr. Kellerman, thank you for coming in. We're investigating financial irregularities involving the HOA during Brenda Hutchison's tenure as president." "What kind of irregularities?" "The new board ordered a full forensic audit of HOA finances. They found some concerning discrepancies and reported it to us. Did you know that Brenda's husband owns a construction management company?" "No, I didn't." "His company was awarded several contracts by the HOA over the past 2 years, totaling over $300,000. Contracts for landscaping, parking lot repairs, security system upgrades, and of course, the warming station project." I started to see where this was going. She was steering contracts to her husband's company, without disclosing the conflict of interest to the HOA members. Yes. That's bad enough, but it gets worse. The forensic audit found that the amounts billed were significantly inflated compared to market rates, and in several cases, work that was billed was never actually performed. That's fraud. Yes, it is. We're looking at embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The total amount we've identified so far is approximately $400,000 over 3 years. Detective Morrison pulled out a folder. "We'd like to ask you some questions about the warming station project specifically." The contractor, Marcus Denton, has already given us a statement. According to him, the HOA paid his company $65,000 for the work. But according to HOA records, Brenda authorized payment of $120,000 for that project to her husband's company, which then subcontracted to Marcus. So she pocketed the difference. That's what it looks like. We're interviewing everyone who had conflicts with the HOA board during this period, because we're trying to establish a pattern of behavior. Did Brenda ever offer you any deals or proposals regarding your property? I told them about the meeting where Brenda, Keith, and Linda had come to my house trying to buy the land. I explained how Brenda had pressured me and how she'd violated the court order. Did she ever threaten you or try to intimidate you? She sent me letters threatening fines. She made snide comments, and she definitely tried to turn the community against me with the special assessment. Detective Morrison took notes. The special assessment was interesting. Linda, the former treasurer, told us that Brenda wanted to collect $1 million allegedly for legal costs and restoration, but the actual costs were under $75,000. Do you know what she planned to do with the excess? I assumed it was just vindictive, making everyone pay more to punish the whole community. According to Linda, Brenda told the board that they needed reserves for future legal battles and that the money would be properly allocated. But the forensic audit suggests Brenda had been siphoning funds regularly. $1 million special assessment would have given her access to a lot more money. I sat back in my chair, processing this. So the whole warming station project might have been a scam from the start. We're not sure yet. It's possible Brenda genuinely wanted the warming station but saw it as an opportunity to inflate costs and pocket money. It's also possible the entire project was designed to create billable expenses. We're still investigating. They asked me a few more questions, mostly about communications I'd had with Brenda and the timeline of events. I provided copies of all the letters, emails, and court documents. As I was leaving, Detective Morrison said, "Mr. Kellerman, this is an ongoing investigation, so I can't share too many details. But I want you to know that you stopping that project probably prevented a much larger theft. If Brenda had completed the warming station through her husband's company, we estimate she would have billed the HOA over $200,000 for a project that should have cost $80,000 at most." I drove home in a daze. What started as a property rights battle had uncovered major criminal activity. Over the next month, the investigation expanded. The district attorney's office got involved. They discovered that Keith, the former vice president, had also been receiving kickbacks. He had approved many of the contracts Brenda had steered to her husband's company in exchange for payments disguised as consulting fees for his own business. In mid-April, Brenda and Keith were both arrested. The charges included theft, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of fiduciary duty. Brenda's husband was also arrested for his role in the scheme. The local news covered it extensively. I was contacted by reporters, but Richard advised me to decline interviews until after any trial. The HOA scandal became a cautionary tale about the importance of financial oversight and transparency in community associations. Linda, as the new HOA president, worked with the insurance company and the district attorney to recover as much of the stolen money as possible. The insurance covered about half of the losses. Brenda and Keith's assets were frozen, and there would be a civil case to recover additional funds. The criminal trial was scheduled for September, but in late July, both Brenda and Keith accepted plea deals. Brenda pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of $380,000. Keith got 2 years and restitution of $90,000. Brenda's husband received 3 years for his role in the conspiracy. The day the sentencing was announced, Linda called me. "Nathan, I want you to know that the board is implementing major changes. We've adopted new bylaws requiring transparent bidding for all contracts, disclosure of any board member conflicts of interest, and regular independent audits. We're also formally apologizing to you again. If you hadn't fought back, this fraud would have continued." "I appreciate that, Linda. I just wanted to protect my property. I had no idea it would uncover all this. That's the thing about standing up to bullies. You never know what rocks you'll turn over. The community owes you a debt." "I don't want anything except to be left alone to enjoy my land," Linda laughed. "Fair enough. But if you ever want to get involved in community activities, you're welcome. We're planning a spring festival next year and we'd love to have you participate." "Maybe," I said non-committally. After we hung up, I walked out to my meadow. It was late summer now, and the wildflowers were blooming again. The construction had damaged a section, but nature was resilient. New flowers were growing where the foundation had been. You could barely tell anything had happened. I thought about everything that had transpired over the past year. What started as a simple property rights violation had turned into a major criminal investigation. Brenda had been so confident in her authority, so certain that the HOA could do whatever it wanted, that she'd gotten reckless. And that recklessness, combined with her greed, had been her downfall. In a weird way, I was glad it happened on my property. If they had built on common land like they should have, the fraud might never have been discovered. Brenda could have kept stealing for years. A few weeks after the sentencing, I got a check in the mail from the HOA. It was a refund of 3 years of my dues, plus the special assessment that had been proposed but never collected. Linda had included a note. "Nathan, the board voted unanimously to refund your dues for the period when the fraud was occurring. It's the least we can do. We're also voting to make several of the HOA fees optional going forward, recognizing that not everyone wants or needs all the services. Your property will always be your sanctuary, and we'll respect that. Thank you for your integrity." I deposited the check and used the money to hire a landscaping company to restore more of the meadow. They brought in native wildflower seeds and repaired the irrigation I had set up. By September, my property looked better than ever. I even attended the HOA meeting in October, mostly to show support for the new board. They were doing things right, focusing on actual community needs without overreach. Tom presented a proposal for a warming station to be built in the community center parking lot, funded by voluntary donations rather than mandatory assessments. The proposal passed, and residents pledged enough money within 2 weeks to fund the project. When winter came, the warming station opened. It was a simple but functional building with heat, cots, water, and emergency supplies. I actually donated some extra blankets and a generator. During the first major snowstorm in December, 8 families used it when power lines went down. It served its purpose perfectly. On a cold January morning, exactly 1 year after the construction equipment had first invaded my meadow, I stood outside with my coffee and watched the sun rise over the mountains. My property was peaceful again. The meadow was healing. The HOA was functioning properly under honest leadership. Justice had been served. I thought about Brenda, sitting in prison, probably still convinced she had been in the right. People like that rarely learned. They believed their position gave them the authority to do whatever they wanted, rules and laws be damned. But the system worked. When pushed, when challenged, the courts had sided with property rights and the law. The community had ultimately chosen transparency and accountability over blind deference to authority. My phone rang. It was Richard. "Nathan, I have some good news. The restitution payments have started coming through. Your share of the recovered funds for legal fees and damages is being processed. You should see a check within a month." "That's great, Richard. Thanks for everything. Thank you for being a client who was willing to fight for what's right." A lot of people would have caved to the pressure. After we hung up, I realized he was right. It would have been easier to just let them build the warming station. To avoid the conflict, the legal fees, the community anger. But easier isn't always right. My property meant something to me. The meadow, the wildflowers, the peace and solitude. I had worked hard to create this sanctuary, and I had every right to protect it. The law existed precisely to prevent those with power from trampling the rights of individuals. The irony was that the community got their warming station anyway, built properly on appropriate land with proper funding. Everyone won in the end, except the criminals who tried to exploit the system. I walked back inside my cabin, the warm air a welcome relief from the January cold. My home was truly mine, secure and protected. The battle had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But it had been worth it. Sometimes standing up to bullies doesn't just protect you. Sometimes it protects everyone they might have hurt in the future. Brenda and Keith would have continued stealing from the community for years if their overreach hadn't led them onto my property. I settled into my favorite chair by the window, looking out at the meadow covered in snow. In a few months, spring would come, and the wildflowers would bloom again in a riot of color. The land would remember what happened here in its own way, and so would I. The warming station was open for anyone who needed it, serving its purpose on land that was actually designated for community use. My meadow remained my meadow, private and protected. The HOA operated with transparency and respect for property rights. And somewhere in a Colorado prison, a former HOA president learned that authority without accountability is just tyranny in disguise, and that even in a homeowners association, the law still matters. That was exactly how it should be.